There's a reason the deepest parts of the ocean are still unexplored. It's not just the crushing pressure or complete darkness, it's what happens when human ego tries to outsmart nature and loses. In 2023, a billionaire-funded submersible vanished on its way to the Titanic. 5 people were lost, including the CEO who built the vessel himself. Stockton Rush wasn't just some guy with a dream and a sub. He was born into power. Rush came from a long line of American prestige. We're talking descendants of not one, but 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence. His family wasn't just wealthy, they were historic. He attended prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy, one of the most elite prep schools in the country. From there, it was on to Princeton University, where he studied mechanical and aerospace engineering, just like his father. From the beginning, Rush saw himself as destined for greatness. By the time he was just 19 years old, Stockton Rush had already done something most engineers only dream about. He became one of the youngest jet transport-rated pilots in Princeton history. Even his Princeton application made it clear he wasn't aiming low. In his admissions essay, he wrote that his ultimate goal was to become an astronaut. That blend of technical skill, raw ambition, and sky-high confidence. It became the blueprint for everything he built afterward. But if you ask people who knew him at Princeton, the praise stops there. They remember him as aloof, self-assured, and impossible to challenge. One former classmate described him as arrogant and bitter. Someone who believed he was the smartest person in every room and made sure you knew it. What he lacked, some say, was humility. The kind of guy who could build a rocket in his garage, but wouldn't listen when you told him it was about to explode. And that mindset, the unwavering confidence, the refusal to be questioned, it would come to define the company he built, and the culture that would ultimately destroy it. Over the years, as Stockton Rush's ambitions got bigger, so did the gap between confidence and caution. To the public, he was a bold innovator, a visionary, a modern-day pioneer pushing boundaries in the name of science and exploration. But behind the scenes, people were worried. Former employees and passengers described a man who rejected feedback, dismissed warnings, and treated safety protocols as obstacles. One engineer didn't mince words. He called Rush a borderline clinical psychopath. Even those who admired his vision admitted he seemed detached from risk. He believed rules slowed innovation, and when someone questioned him, he didn't argue, he steamrolled. After graduating from Princeton in 1984, Rush did what a lot of high-performing engineers did at the time. He went straight to the defense industry. He landed a role at McDonnell Douglas, working on F-15 fighter jet testing, cutting-edge aerospace tech, national defense contracts. It was high-stakes, high-reward work, but it wasn't enough. He wanted to be an astronaut, not in a casual childhood dream way, in a detailed, strategic, spreadsheet and flight hours kind of way. He had built the perfect resume. On paper, he had it all. But in reality, one thing disqualified him from ever becoming an astronaut: his eyesight. A tiny flaw in his genetic code, something he couldn't outsmart, outwork, or out-engineer himself out of. And it closed the door on his dream. Now, imagine what that does to someone like Stockton Rush, a man known for his overwhelming confidence, a man who, by all accounts, never took no for an answer. To be told no, not because he lacked brilliance, but because his biology didn't meet the standard. That kind of rejection doesn't fade, it festers. And maybe that was the turning point. You see, in space, he had to meet someone else's requirements. But in the ocean, he could set his own. Some say that's when his obsession with deep-sea exploration took hold. Not just as a scientific pursuit, but as a redemptive mission. If he couldn't go up, he'd go deeper than anyone ever had. And this time, he wouldn't ask permission. In 1989, Rush earned his MBA from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley, blending technical prowess with a growing desire to build and lead. He started investing in venture capital, launched companies. But even as he dabbled in the world of startups, one obsession kept surfacing: the ocean. Rush wasn't just fascinated with the sea. He was determined to conquer it. In the early 2000s, he built his own personal submersible, affectionately nicknamed Suds. It was a signal to the world, and maybe to himself, that he could do what others hadn't. He didn't want to join the world of ocean exploration. He wanted to rewrite it. In 2009, with his astronaut dreams behind him and his personal submersible experiments under his belt, Stockton Rush was ready to make a bigger move. That year, he teamed up with entrepreneur Guillermo Cernlein to co-found a company that sounded like something out of a science fiction novel: OceanGate. Their mission was bold, almost poetic, to open the oceans for all humanity. But make no mistake, this wasn't charity. This was business. The The idea was to commercialize deep-sea exploration by making submersible dives available, not just to researchers and scientists, but also to adventurers and ultra-wealthy tourists willing to pay for the experience of a lifetime. In Rush's eyes, space tourism was already taking off. So why not do the same beneath the sea? They were building experiences, expeditions, stories. Rush imagined a future where exploring the Titanic wreck wouldn't be reserved for James Cameron or a handful of deep-sea specialists. It would be a bucket list item, sold like a luxury safari or a trip to Mount Everest. It was a chance to reshape his legacy, to become a pioneer after all. But this time it would be on his terms. From the very beginning, Stockton Rush had a problem with rules. One regulation in particular really got under his skin. The Passenger Vessel Safety Act of 1993, a US law specifically designed to protect people who board submersibles for sightseeing or research. Rush believed it was outdated, unnecessary. In his own words, it was needlessly prioritizing passenger safety over commercial innovation. Rather than build a vessel that met third-party certification standards, he deliberately sidestepped them. OceanGate operated in international waters beyond the jurisdiction of US maritime regulators. And instead of calling his customers passengers, he labeled them mission specialists. This created a legal grey area that let him dodge certain safety requirements altogether. To him, regulations were barriers, bureaucratic red tape. You don't get innovation when you have regulators hanging over your shoulder, he was known to say, multiple times, proudly. But here's the thing about safety standards. They exist for a reason. And when you build a submersible to dive 12,500 feet below the ocean, you don't get to skip the checklist just because you think it's inconvenient. When Stockton Rush founded OceanGate, he didn't just reject regulations. He rejected the people who believed in them. Rather than surround himself with deep-sea veterans or cautious engineers, Rush deliberately sought out the opposite. He wanted young, impressionable talent. People who didn't come from traditional submersible programs. People who wouldn't challenge his authority because they didn't yet know enough to question it. "They're not too stuck in how things have always been done," he once said in an interview. "You don't want a 50-year-old white guy who's ex-Navy sub. That's not inspirational." Multiple employees would later describe OceanGate's environment as cult-like. A place where skepticism was unwelcome and Stockton's word was final. And what happens when the only voices left in the room are the ones telling you you're a genius? You stop listening to anything else. By 2016, Stockton Rush had already made dozens of dives in Cyclops 1, OceanGate's earlier submersible prototype. On one of those missions, he set his sights on the wreck of the Andreadora, a passenger ship that sank off the coast of Massachusetts in 1956. It was a notoriously dangerous sight: jagged metal, unstable wreckage, strong currents. A place seasoned divers approached with extreme caution. According to reports and first-hand accounts, Rush was piloting Cyclops 1 himself when the submersible nearly crashed into the side of the Andreadora wreck. He miscalculated his position and panicked. And when the team surfaced and reviewed what went wrong, Rush ignored the advice of his own pilot. He downplayed the danger, refused to adjust his approach, and brushed off warnings about his navigation habits. This was the beginning of a pattern. Here was a man who had already built a culture that didn't welcome criticism, and now he was piloting multi-million-dollar hardware with human lives on board. There was no formal investigation, no media coverage, just whispers among former OceanGate staff, and a growing unease with those within the industry, watching him push boundaries further and further, with less and less regard for what could go wrong. That same year, just months after the Andreadora collision, a new warning emerged. This time it came from inside the company. David Lockridge wasn't just any employee. He was OceanGate's Director of Marine Operations, an experienced engineer tasked with ensuring that the submersibles were safe to operate. And what he saw behind the scenes, it terrified him. Lockridge reviewed the data, he inspected the carbon fiber hull, and he found what he described as critical safety failures. He found signs of delamination, porosity, and a complete lack of proper non-destructive testing. He raised the alarm, formally, internally, loudly, repeatedly. He warned that the Titan was not safe to take passengers to extreme depths, that a failure at 12,000 feet wouldn't be gradual. It would be catastrophic. And how did Stockton Rush respond? He fired him. Lockridge was escorted out of the building, and OceanGate filed a lawsuit against him within days. They claimed he had breached confidentiality and was spreading false information. Lockridge countersued, alleging wrongful termination and pointing to genuine concerns for public safety. The two sides quietly settled out of court. But the damage was done. The internal message was clear: raise your hand and you're out. Lockridge wasn't the last to sound the alarm. But he was one of the first to realise that this company was not interested in being questioned, even when lives were on the line. For decades, deep-sea explorers have trusted titanium, and for good reason. Titanium is a solid metal with a predictable failure pattern. It doesn't splinter, it doesn't absorb water, and it doesn't suffer from mysterious microfractures deep in its core. It just holds, dive after dive, year after year. Titanium-based vessels have been to some of the deepest parts of the ocean. The Russian Mir submersibles, Japan's Shinkai 6500, and even the legendary DSV Alvin, which discovered hydrothermal vents, all of them used either titanium or specialized alloys. Materials chosen not just for their strength, but for their survivability under repeated crushing pressure. But titanium isn't perfect. It's heavy, it's expensive, and it's hard to machine. But in deep-sea engineering, those aren't deal breakers, they're trade-offs. Engineers know how titanium behaves under pressure. They've tested it, studied it, modeled its failure modes across decades of real-world use. If something goes wrong, you can see it coming, with strain measurements. In other words, titanium doesn't surprise you. Stockton Rush saw all of that and thought it was holding innovation back. To him, titanium was a relic, heavy, expensive, and conservative. It belonged to government projects and academic research labs, not to pioneers forging a legacy. So when critics pushed back, when engineers urged caution, Rush pushed harder. "You don't get innovation when you have too many rules," he said. At some point, safety just becomes pure waste. He wasn't looking for materials with proven failure modes. He was looking for materials that could make Titan lighter, faster, cheaper, something that could scale. He believed carbon fiber was that future. By 2018, Stockton Rush had bigger plans than just Cyclops 1. He wanted something revolutionary, a submersible that could dive all the way down to the Titanic, over 12,000 feet beneath the surface. So he began designing what would become OceanGate's crown jewel, the Titan. This wasn't going to be just another deep-sea vessel. It was going to be faster, lighter, more efficient, and most importantly, cheaper. To make that happen, Rush had an idea, a big one. He would build the body of the Titan out of carbon fiber. Carbon fiber had already transformed aerospace. It was lightweight, flexible, and cutting edge. Why not bring that same innovation under the sea? But he ignored a hard truth. The rules of the sky are not the rules of the ocean. At first glance, the material appears to make a lot of sense. Carbon fiber has an incredible strength-to-weight ratio. Pound for pound, it's stronger than steel and far, far lighter. And for OceanGate, that mattered. A lighter vessel meant it was easier to deploy, faster to maneuver, and cheaper to transport. A huge win for commercial expeditions. Rush believed carbon fiber could help him build an entire fleet of submersibles. Ones that could be towed in trailers, launched from ordinary ships, and taken around the world like underwater tour buses. Compared to the heavy metal tankers used by governments and research institutions, the Titan was sleek, agile, disruptive. Carbon fiber wasn't just the future, it was his future. His way of outpacing government agencies, universities, and even legacy tech like titanium hulls. But for all its advantages, carbon fiber came with a catch. One that doesn't matter much on land, but can be fatal in the crushing depths of the sea. A lot of people picture the ocean as being suspended in a giant pool. But the deeper you go, the more that image falls apart. At sea level, the air pressing down on you is about 14.7 pounds per square inch, the weight of the atmosphere. But for every 33 feet you dive below the surface, the pressure increases by another 14.7 psi. At the depth of the Titanic wreck, nearly 12,500 feet, the water pressure is around 6,000 pounds per square inch. That's the weight of a fully loaded garbage truck pressing down on every single inch of your submersible. You're not floating, you're being squeezed, like a soda can in a hydraulic press. Every inch of your sub's hull is under constant attack, trying to cave inward. If your hull has even the smallest weakness, a crack, a bubble, a microscopic flaw, it won't bend. It will implode, instantly. Now here's where things start to fall apart, literally. While carbon fiber looks strong on paper, deep sea pressure exposes its darkest flaws. Unlike metal, carbon fiber isn't a single solid material. It's made of layers. Woven carbon strands held together by epoxy resin. Those layers can start to separate, a failure mode known as delamination. It doesn't always happen instantly. Sometimes it starts with a tiny microscopic void, a bubble, a weak bond, or a hidden imperfection inside the composite. Under the crushing force of the ocean, that void expands. The layers begin to peel apart. The hull weakens from the inside out, until it's too late. Engineers call it capricious behavior because it doesn't bend or buckle. It shatters. Now imagine that happening 12,000 feet under the ocean, where one crack doesn't mean a leak. It means instant implosion. Experts have speculated that carbon fiber might survive a deep dive once, maybe twice. But multiple dives? Over years. That's a risk no certified engineering firm was willing to take. But there was one more weakness no one on board could see. And it was creeping in every time the Titan touched water. Carbon fiber isn't waterproof, not completely. It's held together by epoxy resin, a type of glue that binds the carbon layers and gives the hull its structure. But that resin, it's porous at the microscopic level, which means it can absorb moisture, especially over time and under pressure. Now imagine the repeated dives. Water seeps in molecule by molecule, and each time the sub is pressurized, that moisture is driven deeper into the material, weakening the bonds that hold the hull together. It's a known flaw of using carbon composites in extreme underwater environments, and yet Titan kept diving, again and again and again. But the deep ocean doesn't reward boldness, it punishes arrogance. And when you gamble with the laws of physics, the house always wins. Long before its final dive, engineers had raised quiet alarms about the Titan's design. Not just the materials, but the very shape and structure of the vessel. One of the most striking features was the viewport, the only window inside the sub. In early designs, it was meant to be large and immersive, something worthy of the Titanic, giving passengers a panoramic view of the wreck. But there was a problem, a big one. As the designs were tested, it became clear that a large viewport couldn't be certified to withstand the crushing depths of the North Atlantic. OceanGate was forced to scale the window down, not for design reasons, but for survival. Even then, the final viewport, the one installed on Titan's last dive, was only rated to a depth of 1,300 meters. Titan went to nearly 3,800 meters, almost 3 times deeper than the viewport was designed for. And still, the dives continued. Then there was the hull itself. Most deep-sea submersibles use a spherical design, not because it looks sleek, but because physics demands it. A sphere distributes pressure equally across its surface. It's the safest, strongest shape for surviving the deep. But Titan wasn't a sphere. It was long, cylindrical, nearly 19 feet from front to back. Rush chose the shape to make the vessel more spacious, more comfortable, and more accessible. But in doing so, he created stress points, areas where the pressure wouldn't distribute evenly. Engineers warned that the shape and materials didn't belong together, that they were pushing boundaries for aesthetics and for marketing, not for safety. But as usual, the warnings were ignored. And the Titan dove again. Stockton Rush didn't want to build a submersible that followed the rules. He wanted to rewrite them. Where engineers urged caution, he saw hesitation. And where others demanded certification, he saw bureaucracy standing in the way of innovation. "You don't get innovation when you have too many rules," he said. At some point, safety just becomes pure waste. In Rush's world, belief was enough. Belief in new materials. Belief in his own vision. Belief that he could outthink every expert who told him, this might not hold. But the deep ocean doesn't negotiate with belief. From the outside, the Titan looked sleek, futuristic even. But inside, there was a sound that haunted its dives. Popping, cracking, snapping. The Titan's carbon fiber hull was talking, and what it was saying was, "I'm breaking." OceanGate had installed an internal acoustic monitoring system designed to pick up exactly these kinds of sounds. It would listen for stress inside the hull, tracking any pops or shifts that might signal delamination or structural weakness. And it worked. Dive after dive, the system picked up sounds that experts described as the unmistakable signs of a failing composite. One former passenger described the sound like being inside a bowl of Rice Krispies. Only every snap and crack meant the hull was getting weaker. Engineers were alarmed. Pilots stepped away. Some refused to get back in the sub. But when Stockton Rush heard the cracking, he put in earplugs, literally. That was his solution. Not to redesign the hull, not to cancel the dive, just to stop listening. "Once you can't hear it anymore, it's not a problem," he reportedly told one passenger. It was meant as a joke, but no one was laughing. The system did its job. It gave him a chance to change course. But instead of hearing a warning, Rush treated it like background noise. And so the popping continued. David Lockridge wasn't the only one who raised concerns. He was just the first to be shown the door. Other engineers, both internal and external, began to notice red flags about the overall vibe of Titan's systems, described by more than one expert as jerry-rigged. And then there was the material itself. The carbon fiber Rush used to build Titan's hull was surplus stock, reportedly purchased from Boeing and already past its shelf life. It had been intended for use in aircraft, not for diving 2.5 miles beneath the ocean. Even Boeing, when asked to partner, walked away from the project. People were scared, and not quietly. But for every person who stepped away, Rush found someone willing to step in. When you have access to unimaginable wealth, you don't just build subs. You build a system that can dodge oversight entirely. The Titan wasn't licensed in the US. It was registered under the Bahamas, where submersible regulations are far looser. The launch vessel, the Polar Prince, was registered in Canada. And the dives themselves, conducted in international waters, beyond the reach of almost every major maritime safety agency. No single country had jurisdiction. That was the point. Rush designed the operation like a maze, one that looked legitimate on paper, but in practice was built to avoid hard questions. And yet, people still paid. A seat on the Titan cost $250,000 per person. For a seat bolted inside a carbon fiber tube, steered with a video game controller, with no official certification or government oversight, and structural noises loud enough to scare off seasoned pilots. On the morning of June 18, 2023, the Titan began what would become its final descent into the depths of the North Atlantic. On board were 5 passengers. At the helm was Stockton Rush, a man who had staked his career, and now his life, on the promise of deep-sea exploration. Seated beside him was Hamish Harding, a British billionaire, adventurer, and aviation record-setter, known for his daring spirit and passion for pushing limits. Also on board were Shahzada Dawood, a prominent Pakistani businessman and philanthropist, and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman, a university student who, despite being nervous about the dive, wanted to share the experience with his father. Rounding out the crew was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, often called Mr. Titanic, a retired French naval commander and Titanic expert who had visited the wreck more than 30 times. If there was anyone who knew what lay below, it was him. The 5 men boarded the Titan from the Polar Prince, a Canadian research vessel positioned above the Titanic's final resting place in international waters. At 8 a.m., the Titan was sealed shut from the outside, its passengers locked inside the carbon fiber cylinder, with no way to open the hatch without assistance from the surface crew. There was no escape hatch, no emergency door, just 17 bolts, secured from the outside, that would hold until the dive was complete. The crew aboard the Polar Prince gave the final checks, and Titan slipped beneath the surface. For Stockton Rush, this was another routine launch. For the others, it was the beginning of a once-in-a-lifetime journey. For the next hour and a half, the Titan descended slowly into darkness, falling deeper with every passing minute. At around 9:45 a.m., the submersible was still in contact with the Polar Prince through brief text-based check-ins. There was no live video feed, no live audio, just short, delayed updates. At approximately 10:45 a.m., nearly an hour and 45 minutes into the descent, the Titan sent what would be its final transmission. A simple data ping meant to confirm the vessel's status as it continued its steady fall toward the ocean floor. Then, nothing. At first, the crew aboard the Polar Prince assumed it was a routine communication dropout. The Titan had experienced them before, part of the known limitations when operating in such extreme depths. They waited for the next ping, but the minutes passed. Then an hour, and the silence didn't lift. By 12:00 p.m., the Titan was expected to begin its ascent. If everything had gone according to plan, the submersible would have been making its slow, steady return to the surface. But there was no sign of it. The crew aboard the Polar Prince initiated standard recovery procedures. They scanned the waters, refreshed equipment, and attempted to re-establish contact. Still nothing. As the hours dragged on with no response, concern gave way to quiet dread. The sea was calm, the air was still, and the silence from below was absolute. Inside the control room, anxiety was rising. Phone calls were made, authorities were alerted. The operation was no longer a dive. It was now a search. As the hours stretched into the evening, and then into the night, hope clung to one remaining thread: the oxygen clock. According to OceanGate's own specifications, the Titan was equipped with an estimated 96 hours of breathable air for 5 people, assuming everything inside was functioning perfectly. That meant, by most calculations, the oxygen would run out sometime Thursday morning, around 7 to 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And so a grim countdown began. The Coast Guard launched a coordinated international search effort, joined by Canadian aircraft, sonar-equipped vessels, commercial ships, and deep-sea robotics teams. But the ocean is vast, and Titan, by comparison, was smaller than a minivan. Satellite news tickers began broadcasting the hours remaining. 2 days of air left. Oxygen down to 40 hours. Time is running out. Every moment, every headline, every interview revolved around that number. But even that glimmer of hope had an asterisk, because no one knew if the Titan had power, if it had light, if it had heat, if the cabin pressure had held, or if, in truth, there was anything or anyone left to save. As the search stretched into its second day, something extraordinary shattered the tense silence of the North Atlantic. Crews began reporting rhythmic banging sounds roughly every 30 minutes. At first, the hope was cautious. Could it be a distress signal? A final act of survival from inside the Titan? The noises were captured by sonar-equipped aircraft and sonobuoys, audible during long hours of monitoring. Every signal brought new hope, until officials cautioned otherwise. A Coast Guard captain later admitted, "With respect to the noises, we don't know what they are, to be frank with you." Experts later suggested they were likely natural ocean sounds or echoes from other vessels, not attempts at human communication. By the morning of June 22nd, the oxygen clock had officially run out. It had been 4 days since the Titan vanished. The world had been glued to updates. News segments, interviews, search maps, live streams of ocean scans. Families clung to the possibility of a last-minute rescue, that the sub had somehow survived even if trapped, that a miracle might still be possible. And then the news broke. Around 8:55 a.m. Eastern, the US Coast Guard announced that a remotely operated vehicle, deployed by the Canadian ship Horizon Arctic, had discovered a debris field on the seafloor, just 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic. Scattered across the ocean floor were the remains of the Titan's pressure hull, found at depths where pressure exceeds 6,000 pounds per square inch. There was no ambiguity. The Titan had imploded. Instantly, catastrophically. All 5 passengers had died. Later that day, another piece of the puzzle came to light. A US Navy official confirmed that on the morning of June 18th, just hours after the dive began, a classified acoustic system had detected a sound consistent with an underwater implosion, recorded just after the Titan lost contact. They had known all along, but waited to share the information publicly, choosing to continue the search until it could be verified. Just like that, the search was over. Not with a rescue, but with a recovery. Recently, Netflix released a groundbreaking documentary shattering many standing beliefs about the OceanGate disaster. One of the most striking moments comes from David Lockridge. He explains how he warned the company about the carbon fiber hull, the porosity, the delamination, the lack of non-destructive testing. He describes, in plain language, a submersible that was never ready for the pressure it would face. The documentary plays real audio from the day Lockridge was fired. You hear Rush's voice, cold, direct, ending the conversation, shutting down the descent. Former employees describe a workplace built around a single personality, Stockton Rush. Driven, charismatic, but also, in their words, narcissistic, controlling, and obsessed with fame. The portrait of a man not just willing to break the rules, but eager to do so, believing that brilliance gave him permission. The documentary next digs into the Titan's real-time monitoring system. The acoustic sensors Rush often pointed to as proof of safety, but experts interviewed explain the flaw. It could only detect failure as it happened. Not the slow deterioration leading up to it, not the cracks, not the delamination, not the fatal stress hiding just beneath the surface. The system didn't protect passengers. It recorded their final moments. What happened to the Titan wasn't just a tragedy. It was a case study in what happens when innovation is allowed to outrun regulation. When ambition is given a blank check and nobody steps in to say no. And for what? For the thrill of planting a flag where few had gone. For the illusion of owning something as sacred as a shipwreck. The headlines, legacy, and a self-made story of daring against the odds. What the documentary lays bare is that ambition is not the enemy. But ambition without checks, without skepticism, without humility, that's when it becomes deadly. The Titan was meant to make history. Instead, it became a cautionary tale etched into the ocean floor. 5 lives were lost. This wasn't just a disaster of engineering. It was a disaster of ego. A slow-motion collapse of ethics, oversight, and common sense. While the wreckage of the Titan now rests near the Titanic, 2 tragedies separated by more than a century. Both tell eerily similar stories. And in the end, the ocean took what it was always going to take, without hesitation and without mercy. Thank you for watching Info Inquisitive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We will see you in the next one.